All right, welcome. It is 1 o'clock Central Time. Welcome to the Achieve Center for Leadership free monthly webinar. My name is Chris Downey. I'm the Vice President of Consulting Services here with the Achieve Center for Leadership, and I'm excited to host today's webinar on culture transformation, your path to a better workplace. I will introduce Dan Dirksen, who is going to be our speaker for the day in just a couple of minutes here. But just to do a little bit of housekeeping with you all, we're here for 45 minutes this afternoon, or might be morning for you, depending on where you are joining us from. But we're here for 45 minutes. And we're going to save some time at the end for some Q&A. But our hope today is let's be as interactive as possible. So you don't need to wait till the end to ask questions. Have questions come in. In fact, let's use the chat. Let's use the resources that are available to us here, folks. In fact, why don't you let us know where you're joining us from today? Let us know where in the world you're joining us from and even how you're doing. I will let you know that I am joining you from our head office here in Winnipeg, Manitoba, a very cold day in Winnipeg. And I am definitely excited to be here with you all as I say that. So do let us know where you're joining. Dan loves interaction, so keep the comments going. I will chime in from time to time with some questions as they come up, but we will reserve some time at the end for Q&A as well. I also want you to know that this session is being recorded. So no need to take it, if you want to take notes, feel free to do that. But we will be sending out a link following this session with the recording. So no need to feel that you need to scramble. You'll be able to share that with anyone that you feel could benefit from that. So let me take this. I'm seeing people join us from we are well represented here. I think I'm seeing coast to coast, which is fantastic. And thank you again for joining us. So good morning and good afternoon. I'd love to introduce a good friend and colleague, Dan Dirksen. Dan and I have the pleasure to partner up on many culture transformations. Dan and I love to have discussions about leadership and culture. Dan is well-versed in the subject. He has a master's in organizational leadership. And not that that's not important, it is, but beyond that, Dan actually has 15 years of real world experience, really living and breathing culture. And he has done that as a leader, focusing on building community, working with folks of all ages and in a variety of sectors. So Dan is definitely someone I leverage often when we talk about healthy workplace cultures and how to get there. So I'm excited to do that. Dan is also co-authoring a book with me that will be coming out later in the year. So there'll be more of that to come with. We're having a lot of fun with that. So I'd like to hand that over to hand it over to Dan. But Dan, maybe to pass the baton to you, let me ask you this question. Culture. Why are we talking so much about this?
Yeah, that's great. Thanks, Chris. Appreciate the intro. And I guess now we got to write that book. You put it out into the world. So
it's out there. It's out there. We're doing it.
Get writing. So I'm excited for a very clear reason today. We're talking about this concept of culture transformation. You might have experienced that in different ways, in different contexts. That word might mean different things to different people, and we'll unpack all of that. But here's a number that really motivates me, and I just want to put it out there, and I'll ask the rhetorical question. How many hours do you think that you're going to spend at work in your lifetime? Okay. The most common answer we get is too many. The answer is too many, right? The real answer, depending on how you do the math, is about 94,000 hours. Okay, 94,000 hours is too many if it doesn't add value to your life, right? The way I always say it is 94,000 hours is too much time for me to give and invest in anything in my life that isn't significantly adding meaning and value beyond a paycheck, right? 94,000 hours is too much if it sucks. This is really at the core of what we believe here at Achieve. Our central belief is we believe everyone deserves to like where they work. We know that our experience at work, how those 94,000 hours get lived out, that impacts everything, right? Over and over again, we see in the research that work satisfaction is one of the one or two predictors of life satisfaction. So when work isn't going well, life doesn't feel like it's going well. And it's one of the top predictors of mental health and well-being. So when work isn't healthy, it's so much harder for us as individuals to be healthy. And the way I always say it is it's not okay for work to not be okay, right? Sometimes we throw up our hands and say, well, work is work. Just put your head down, do the grind, get the paycheck, and you'll have fun on the weekend. It's too many hours for that attitude. And so we really deeply believe that we can build workplaces that actually add value and bring meaning and joy into people's life. And when that happens, I won't go into all the stats, but all the right numbers move in the right directions, right? So productivity, profitability, all of that goes up, quality goes up, customer satisfaction goes up, safety incidents go down, absenteeism and turnover, that all goes down. If we can figure out how to build workplaces that really engage people and are a source of joy and meaning and value for them, all of our business metrics move in the right direction. Okay, so to me, this is why I'm here. I want to talk about how do we create a culture that is good for people and good for the organization. So let's just start on the same page. When we talk about culture, what do we mean by that? We've all experienced culture. I know sometimes when we talk about that word, we're thinking of like national culture, we're maybe thinking of like ethnic culture, and that's all true. What we're talking about specifically is workplace culture, and that's just the reality of everywhere a human group comes together, you have culture. When people are together, their norms, their behavior, their conversation, their language, all of that creates culture, right? And so the way that we define it is it's simply your identity as an organization. It's your values, it's your behaviors, it's what you believe, it's what you do, it's how you talk. All of that determines what your culture is. The simplest way to put it is it's the way it's done around here. This is what's normal, right? So when I go into an organization, people tell me, well, our official policy is this, or here's the process we're supposed to follow, but here's how it actually gets done. Here's what we really do. That's your culture, right? Culture is how you really do things and how you really get things done in an organization. An analogy that I like using for culture is just this idea of a river. Culture is a powerful flow of a river, right? I don't know if you've ever tried uh, to row against the current. If you've been in a canoe or a kayak, I remember as a teenager, my friends and I were on a canoe trip, and we were camped beside some rapids, and we decided, as teenage boys do, that we should have a contest to see who could swim up these rapids, right? Who's the strongest swimmer? And so I jumped in and I started swimming as fast as I could, heads down, you're putting in all the effort. And then I look up beside me and I had not moved an inch. Okay, so I was expending vast amounts of energy going nowhere, right? This is the power of culture in a workplace, right? If you don't know what the sort of the unwritten norms are or the rules, you can spend a lot of energy and actually not accomplish your goals and move in the wrong direction. And so when I see people that are in a culture that really it just feels misaligned with them, it's like a tree planted in that river, and eventually it's going to get beaten down. It's going to bend. It might break, right? You can only row against the river for so long before you either get burnt out and leave, or you give in and go along with the flow, right? I've seen many new employees enter that flow, and within 3 to 6 months of being in an organization, suddenly they're acting and they're talking and they're sounding like everyone else. I've seen kind of heroic CEOs come in and say, we're going to turn this place around and we're going to change how it's done here. And a year later, things feel pretty similar. And the new leader is acting a lot like the old leader. All right, that's the kind of the power the powerful shaping force that culture is in an organization. You can't row against it for very long. The goal is to redirect it, right? Transformation is about redirecting the flow of the river so that the behavior we want is what comes naturally and easily to you. I mean, imagine if everyone in your organization naturally behaved in ways that supported your strategy and purpose. I mean, what if living out your shared values wasn't something that required extra thought or effort or courage? It's just what happened, right? Imagine if your status quo was a good thing, right? Your status quo was actually your competitive advantage that propelled you towards your goals, right? That's the power of culture. We want to create a culture, a flow, and a status quo that actually naturally moves people in the right direction together collectively. And so that's one analogy, one that we often like to talk about here that actually comes from a book that our partners in the organization wrote. Uh, it's about lettuce. Okay, so we're talking about rivers, we're talking about lettuce. They wrote a book called "Don't Blame the Lettuce," and it's based on quote from an author and a Buddhist monk, actually. It says, if we plant lettuce and it fails to thrive, we do not blame the lettuce. Okay, I know how easy it is to point fingers at people, right? When things aren't going well with the organization, when you're missing your goals, when things feel unhealthy, it's just so easy to point at someone and say they're the problem. It's because of them. It's what they do. It's what they don't do. And this quote is just a reminder to me that our first thought is not to blame people. It's to look at the system. And we know this. Our environment influences us in profound ways. People always respond to their environment in ways that they believe are reasonable, right? So everybody's responding to their environment in a way that they believe is reasonable, and that causes sometimes good people to behave in unhealthy ways. And before you think, yeah, I know some people like that who are behaving in poor ways. Like it's us too, right? Let's just own it. Sometimes it's us, right? I can't see all of you, but just answer the question. Have you ever gossiped in a workplace? Have you ever spoken about somebody else in the workplace? I was actually with a group of friends recently, and somehow this topic of workplace gossip came up, and one of them just said, I love gossip. Like it's so much fun to gossip at work. And I don't think this person actually knew what I did for a living, but they were talking about it. It was just a reminder to me that uh, behavior like that, while we all know it has negative consequences, right? It works against this idea of inclusion, belonging. It creates division in organizations. It's an unhealthy, passive aggressive way to deal with tension and unresolved conflict and things that are bothering us in the organization. But if that's normal in a culture, and there's not another way to successfully handle or meet some of those needs within us, we engage in those behaviors, right? And so just a reminder to me that culture ultimately dictates and influences strongly the behavior that we see around us. So when that river is flowing in the right direction, and that's our goal. What we're talking about today is what happens when that river is flowing in the right direction and how do you redirect it? There's going to be three signs that we look for and that you're going to see. Okay. One is performance. You're hitting your goals, you're accomplishing your strategy. You're going to see engagement. People are engaged in their work, they're committed and enthusiastic and absorbed in their tasks, but also committed to the organizational purpose as well, right? So there's an organizational citizenship that happens. And the third one is well-being, right? In a healthy culture, we find healthy people, right? So how does work contribute to people that, we're not fatigued, we're not chronically stressed, we're not burning out at high rates, but the environment actually supports our psychological health and well-being. And so these are the three that we see. And I'm just curious, go ahead and put it in chat. Okay. I want to know when you think of these three circles and you think of the workplaces that you've been in or currently in, what are the signs that you see that indicate your culture needs change? Okay. What are you seeing really practically that tells you, hey, something's in the water here, right? This is not as healthy as it could be. We need to address this, right? So when you think of, why culture transformation is needed, what do you see, right? And so I'll give a moment to put that in the chat, and Chris, you can tell me when it pops up.
Yeah,
Our clients, yeah, go for it.
would love to hear, see in the chat signs that your culture might be tending to. I think, Dan, you already mentioned one. When we see high levels of gossip, as fun as it can be, that can definitely be an indicator. But we are seeing things like a high sick time, so sick leave and turnover, a lack of engagement. I think the opposite of one of the ones you pointed out there. Maybe it's excessive use of wellness time, high turnover again. where people are struggling with mental health issues that might be caused as a result of what's happening in the workplace. There's lots of chat going on here, Dan, but I think to sum up what I'm seeing in the chat here is the exact opposite of what you just put up as the signs of a healthy culture. People not thriving, as you mentioned, low levels of engagement, and just not performing well.
Yeah, and we see it, we know it. Actually, intuitively, we all know what an unhealthy culture looks like. For some reason, we tend to put up with it as this is just what work is. We don't believe work has to be that way. And we see in every organization, even the most unhealthy organizations I've been a part of or worked with, there usually are some bright spots. Yeah, there's usually like a team or a department somewhere that has managed to kind of buck the trend, and somehow they're standing strong in the current, or they've diverted and created a little stream for themselves somehow. But there are bright spots. But intuitively, we know what it feels like, right? People are cynical. There's a lack of trust, right? We know there's high absenteeism, turnover, people taking a lot of mental health leaves, perhaps. It could just be poor performance on failed projects, inefficiencies, overruns. You could be looking at profit, market share. I mean, honestly, there can be huge changes in your industry or market environment that tells you, hey, we need a different culture, right? Sometimes we need a culture transformation, not because it's unhealthy. It actually just doesn't help us get to where we need to go right now as an organization, right? When COVID hit and we all needed to shift and figure out remote and hybrid and do work totally differently, uh, why that was so challenging was because it required a culture transformation for many organizations, right? There was an external stimulus that required us to actually change something internally. What was normal needed to change, right? And so we see all sorts of reasons for it. So here's the problem, right? We know that not having the right culture can work against performance, engagement, and well-being. Here's a report that was put out in 2016, actually. It said out of more than 7,000 CEOs and human resource leaders, only 19% felt like they had the right culture. Okay, so that means 4 out of 5 were like, I don't think the flow of the river is actually getting us where we need to go, right? We're not staying competitive. We're not staying healthy. We're not staying engaged. So 4 to 5 don't feel like they've got it right. So if we recognize that and say, okay, let's engage in culture transformation, how are we doing with that? Another stat, also 19%, only 19% of culture change efforts are deemed successful. Okay, it's complex work. Culture change might be one of the most complex change efforts you can take in organizational development. But just think about those two numbers, right? So 19% say we've got the right culture, and of those that try to change it, only 19% are getting it right, right? And so really, we want to approach this and say, what are the 19% doing well? What can we learn from those people? What are the classic and common hurdles and missteps that are causing the other people to slip up, right? What are the barriers they're facing? And so we needed a model for ourselves that really captures what is kind of a decade's worth of work as an organization, helping clients change culture. And we wanted to compare that, and we want to combine that and synthesize this with research and best practices, and really just take what we've learned and put it out in the public, right? Truthfully, we want to take what's internal for us as an organization and share that publicly, because the truth is, we want to see exponentially more organizations transforming their cultures, and we want to provide as many resources as we can for you to do that. And so we want to introduce the roadmap that we follow when working with organizations here. And I realize we're going to go through this fairly quickly. Don't worry, at the end of this, not only are you going to have a recording of this, but we're actually going to follow up with an email, and you're going to get a document that walks you through all of what you're going to see here today. And so let me introduce you to our culture transformation roadmap. Okay, so here's the visual. You're going to see 3 circles, and I know there's lots going on there. There's an inner circle, a middle circle, and an outer circle. There's 3 main phases to this transformation, and we visualize it as circles because really there's nothing linear about culture change. This is a highly interconnected, interrelated journey that we're going to be on, and yet at the same time, there is some progression, right? So you're going to see those kind of bent lines, those chevron lines that allow you to see some progression in the circles there. Right at the core, our first phase, we've termed it clarify. The goal of our first phase is to get on the same page so that we all have a clear picture of the current reality and agree on where we need to go. Okay, so that's the first one. Clarify is the first phase. And the first step in the first phase is to assess. Okay, 2/3 of organizations that successfully changed their culture started with an assessment. Okay, think about that. 2/3 of the 19% that successfully changed their culture start with getting really clear on where we are, right? And this is a common failure point. Employees and leadership teams don't agree on what it's really like around here because we all see culture like different faces of a diamond. And we need to really get honest with ourselves and say, what is our identity? What is our culture? Right. And so we need to, I always use the analogy of a map, right? Before we figure out where we want to go, I mean, that's great. Know where you want to go. You have to know where you are on the map. Otherwise, you don't know if your first step should be north, west, south, or east. Right? We have to know where we are so we know how to take our first steps, right? So step one is let's just get really honest with ourselves. Let's understand what our actual values are, not just what we put on the website, but what are the values that really drive our behavior. And so in this phase, we're doing a lot of listening, we're doing a lot of observing, we're listening, we're responding. There's going to be some triage that happens here as soon as we hear from people what's going on. Likely, we're going to engage in some short-term action planning to address and to let people know they've been heard. But the first step, simply know where you are on the map. Step two, figure out your destination, right? And I say this is step two, know where you are first. And that's important because if you start with envision where you want to be, you might pick a destination that you can't actually get to. Okay, so the truth is you have a river can only be redirected so much, right? If it's flowing south, we're not going to do a 180 in 1 year and we're going to start going north, right? And so you have to know where you are. So you kind of know the confines of what is our path and what's possible for us, because there's aspects of our culture that we want to keep and that determine where we will go, right? And so we have to look at where we are first, and then we can start to say, what's possible for us. If we were to expand kind of the best moments when we're really at our best as an organization, if we were to leverage that and see more of it, what would we look like? Right? Let's dream together and have those conversations. And this is a really co-created process. Okay, so please hear me in this. This is not a process that we engage in where it's a few top leaders in an offsite retreat somewhere. This is a really participative process where we want to get everyone in the organization to have a voice and to begin to see where we could be. There's a simple quote that I often follow, and that's people support the worlds they help create, right? And so we want to be part of a process that feels kind of grassroots and bottom up, that we're co-creating together. We're discerning our values, we're figuring out what change could look like, and we're creating a scorecard at this stage to say, if we were to get to this desired culture, what would that look like? Right? What are the metrics? What are the stories we would hear? What are the behaviors we would see? And so we really are painting a vivid picture of the future. The third stage here is align. Okay, so we've looked at where we are, we looked at where we want to go. It's so critical at this point to make sure that your senior leadership is aligned and agree on the direction and what it means for them. Okay, so again, a common failure point for culture change that isn't successful: misaligned leaders. Okay, for a variety of reasons, unresolved conflicts, competing agendas, history, trauma. It could be lots of things happening in an organization. If there is division in the leadership, you're going to have massive factions in your organization, right? A crack at one end can turn into a canyon at the other. And so we have to address and have some hard conversations with leadership to say, what are the tensions here? Do we agree? Who do we need to be, and how do we need to lead in order to see this culture become everything that we want it to be in the future? right? And so it starts with us. And I realized that I said, this needs to be a co-created journey. There's a grassroots component to it. But the truth is, in most organizations, there's a hierarchy, there's power differentials, there's decision rights, there's power distance. We need those with the most power in an organization to take the first steps. Otherwise, what you see is, hey, we've said this, but this is how I see my managers and leaders behaving, and those don't line up. If that's the truth, people will jump ship, right? This doesn't feel real to us. This just feels like another, whitewashed thing, just another superficial change effort that we've gone through that, puts out some nice words on a website. That's not what we want, right? And so at Align, we're creating space for open and safe dialogue for leaders to actually have the space to make this their own, right? We don't need managers to be parrots for corporate culture. We want them to really own it, right? So of our desired future, every leader and manager needs to answer the question, which aspects of this really excites me? Why is this important to me? And how can I articulate it to my team in a way that's authentic and meaningful to me, right? And so the align phase really is about dealing with some of those divisions and tensions at the top and making sure we know what the behaviors and actions of leaders in this desired future culture look like. So this is the foundation, right? Let's clarify, let's align, let's get on board. And then we move into that second ring, which we just call transform, right? Here is where we really engage in some of the practical interventions. And we're going to do this in three primary domains. And while we have them in sequential order, you're going to find that you jump into each of these three buckets in various times in different ways based on what's needed. The first one that we want to talk about is individual behaviors. Yeah, so if we define culture as the way we do things around here, then to change culture, we have to change the way we do things around here, starting at the individual level. And so we're moving beyond leaders and we're trying to reinforce behaviors of every individual within the organization to align with our ideal culture, right? And so really our goals at this point is helping every person understand and wrestle with what it means to live out our values, right? What are these real to me, right? Can I also have space to push and pull on this and ask challenging questions and also ask the question of like which of these pieces really aligns with me and what excites me and what does this mean for me, right? Because individually we have to get to that point where we agree on what misaligned behavior looks like. Okay, so can we talk about and agree that gossip or staying silent when you should speak up, disrespect, poor customer interactions, saying this is the way we've always done things around here. Can we agree those are not the behaviors we need moving forward? So what do we need instead, right? So how do we celebrate and share stories where people are acting as champions of our desired culture and also provide accountability for when we see behavior that's misaligned with where we're going? So we have to figure out some interventions and ways to reinforce and celebrate and name the behaviors we're really needing to see throughout our organization. And then we zoom out a little bit and we're looking at team practices, right? So every team actually has its own micro culture, right? So an organization has a macro culture. Every team and department has their own micro culture. You know this. IT has a different culture than sales versus HR versus executive leadership. Every department has its own micro culture. And so the goal of this stage is to figure out how do we synthesize that unique micro culture that exists on a team with the organizational culture to make sure those things are flowing together in a meaningful way, right? And because it is unique, this is not something that can be dictated top down, right? We actually need to empower teams to decide for themselves, what does it look like for us to make sure we're aligned with and supporting and strengthening the culture of our organization, right? What does that particularly look like for who we are and what our goals are as a team? And so you're going to have those conversations and you're going to look at team processes such as how you meet, how you communicate as a team. You're going to look at the roles within the team, your particular goals, all of the team processes that exist in your small circle uh, are up for grabs, right? How do we evaluate them? How do we change them? How do we move forward in that regard? And I think there's and I was talking with Chris earlier about this. There's a good news story in here, right? So if you're joining us today and you say, hey, I'm not like an organizational leader, I'm a middle manager or I'm a frontline manager. Uh, this is a place that you have a lot of control and a lot of influence. Okay. You can't control everything that happens in the organization, but you can ensure that your team and your department is one of the bright spots in the organization. Okay, so this is an area where you've got a lot of influence. And so we're looking at individual behaviors, we're looking at team practices, and then we're zooming way out, and we have to look at the broad organizational systems. When we see culture changes that fail, one of the reasons that happens is we expect change at a small scale. We expect individuals to be acting differently, and we expect team leaders to be doing things differently. But we don't actually get to and address the root causes or the systemic barriers that exist, right? So example is, you could have a value that says, we really value collaboration and we want the whole organization to feel like one team. But if your incentives, goals, and performance metrics are all tied to individuals or departments, it's unlikely that you're going to see cross-functional collaboration as the norm, right? And so based on what our value is, we have to look at some of these big systems like hiring and onboarding, performance management, how we select, train, and promote managers, goal setting, our organizational wide communication strategies and channels. And as I say this as a more advanced move, we also need to start looking at our structure, our compensation, some of these big systems that really can work against where we want to be, right? And so this is obviously longer term change. Individual behaviors and team practices we can do in short bursts, and we can use small changes to experiment and test new behaviors and new practices. Organizational systems likely needs to be integrated with some of your annual planning rhythms. So that could be your strategic planning, it could be your business plan. That takes time and run up. We need to get the right stakeholders involved, and likely that's going to need some time in the budget. And so we're looking at all three of these, right? So we want to see change, and we can't ignore any of them. We have to figure out ways to change individual behaviors and support that. We have to be looking at the practices that exist at every micro culture and every small circle in the organization. But we do need to make sure that we have a plan in place that's going to cover multiple years to look at these large organizational processes and systems to ensure they're all supporting and enabling behavior that we want to see moving forward. So the last ring, and I'm going to be quick here because I want to leave some time for Q&A. The last ring really is about sustaining momentum. Okay, so the last ring is less about stages as it is about sort of skills and practices that we need to get good at. As an organization, we need to have built the muscles, sort of the internal capability to continuously renew our culture, right? To continuously look at our cultural health. And that really is the key to long-term success, where it often drops off, right? People can do the first and second stage here or phase, and then you see it revert, right? You can see an organization push hard for a culture transformation for a year, maybe a little bit more, and then it plateaus and it inevitably starts moving backwards, right? We haven't really embedded the process of change into our organization. We haven't built that muscle. And so while the first two phases are important, the last phase really is about, let's make sure we continually improve what we've been doing and build on the things that we've established. And so those kind of the three skills here are learning to monitor. So we're looking at our culture scorecard, right? We're looking at, we're gathering feedback, we're doing pulse surveys, we're looking at data and metrics. We're trying to figure out, are things changing, and what are the early warning signs that we might be going in a direction that was unintended, right? There might be unintended consequences or surprising behavior that you see. Someone has to be monitoring this. So obviously leaders have to be looking at this. In our work, we often have an internal group that's selected by employees and made up of employees to act as the group that really is charged with this monitoring, as sort of an internal culture team, committee, whatever you choose to call them. But it's a group of employees in the system to say, hey, we're going to make sure that we sustain attention on this, and we're going to keep our finger on the pulse to see what's going on. So we're monitoring. Second is just learning to uphold behaviors. And that's our way of saying, how do we reinforce? How do we celebrate what's working well? How do we hold things accountable that are misaligned with our behavior, right? And so we're finding ways to uphold and encourage and both formally and informally recognize what it is that's going well in our organization. And finally, on our third ring here is just adapt. This is a fundamental skill for sustaining cultural change, is we're learning and we're adapting. As I've said, culture change is complex work. You're going to try something. It's a little bit like redirecting the flow of a river. You're going to put a dam in place, but you don't always know where the water's going to flow, right? And so you have to do something and then learn and watch and adapt and try again, right? Now we're going to put something here and we're going to keep redirecting. So it's this continual dance of acting, learning, and adapting. And so that's kind of the ongoing effort of culture change. And so I want to, as we shift into Q&A here, I just want to ask you a question again, because I think we all know what this looks like. We all know the signs of a lack of health. Now I want you to think about the opposite reality for you, right? Have you been, think back to your healthiest workplace culture, where you say, this is a place where performance was high, engagement was high, people were doing well. Okay, I hope that you can think of a place. Get that team or that season or that workplace in your mind. What was the impact that had on you? Okay, how did that make you feel? How did it affect your behavior? Go ahead and put it in chat. What was the impact that that culture had on you? All right, I want you to just kind of ground yourself in that reality. And as that's coming in, I just want to leave you with one final quote here. And this is from an author, and he says, the map is not the territory. You have to experience the journey. So our culture transformation roadmap, we don't claim it to be perfect, and we know that it's just a map, right? A map of getting through the Rocky Mountains might look really easy on paper. The journey is full of challenges and beautiful vistas and all those things. As people within an organization, we just have to recognize knowing the map doesn't always make us an excellent trail guide, but knowing where you're going is the first step, right? Have the map and then enjoy the journey. Okay, go through the highs and lows together. If you stay committed and sustain attention, we really do believe you're going to get to the other side. Chris, are we seeing
Excellent.
people in the chat here?
Yeah, lots of chat going on there, Dan. I love that. Thank you for sharing that. I want to get to a couple of questions, but I just want to share here with you some of the things we're seeing in the chat around the impact those healthy cultures have had on people. People go above and beyond joyfully, more fully as themselves. That was from Leslie. We're seeing work didn't even feel like work. Isn't that amazing? Made coming to work each day exciting from the Robin Hood Association. Thank you. Trust. People felt trusted, respected, valued, wanted to participate. It was very creative and fun. That came from Christine. So many good impacts. I think what that really validates, I'll just say on my own personal level, Dan, when I've been part of a healthy workplace culture, I felt like a better person after I was there. Wow, what an impact that is. So I think what I'm hearing here is massive upside to a healthy culture. In addition to all of the things you said, people just do better.
It's worth it. We know intuitively we all know it's worth it.
Yeah, let's take on some questions here that were asked. And earlier on in your conversation, Judy asked this question, or kind of made a comment, but I think there's a question in here that culture change can be tricky, and we know it can be. But sometimes people aren't honest. So I think in that idea of when we're clarifying, sometimes people hold back, and I'm just curious how you might, how might you address something like that?
Yeah, that's true. I mean, that in and of itself says something about your culture, right? We've been in organizations where it feels so unsafe to speak up the assessment actually becomes really difficult because people are suspicious and will this, will there be career consequences to me if I say something here? And so, really to go to, the extra mile to ensure anonymity and confidentiality. And so I'll say you can learn a lot as a leader just by learning to create a safe space, right? Free of consequence, asking for feedback. I'll also say there's limitations to that. Okay. Ask the questions, learn internally. But the truth is, if you're in the culture, you're swimming in the waters, it's not like you're not trying to be honest. It's sometimes you can't actually see it for what it's worth. But something that feels normal and not worth mentioning might actually be quite unique, right? And so an external party can spot that in a way. And I always say the newest employees in your organization are some of the best people to ask about what your culture is, because they're going to see things that you've long forgotten about, right? That you think are just the status quo and they're normal. And so yeah, and there's a variety of ways to do that, right? So obviously surveys, focus groups, interviews, but it's a hurdle for sure. Great safe space for people to.
Love that, Dan. It's even when people are holding back, that says something right there, right? Where we always say we're constantly communicating. I will say if people are struggling with that, reach out to us. We have resources that can help with that for sure. But on that note, I actually Leslie shared asked a question: is there a risk of entering, say, into the clarify phase, but then failing to do something about it? I think we see that often where people kind of go and asking questions and then hear nothing
100%.
more about it.
Yeah. No, absolutely. There's a danger. Yeah. It's unfortunate reality that we can feel motivated to make a difference. And then we learn and we hear, and suddenly we're hit with the complexity of, oh, shoot, this is a lot. What do we do with this? Right. And so, I think the danger that I see that typically happens is we take that information and we actually keep it to ourselves for a little bit too long. As a leadership group, we kind of sit on it, we massage it, we wordsmith it. How do we respond to this? What's our plan? And sometimes 6 to 12 months can go by from assessment to talking about it with your organization. And by that time, you've not only lost a bunch of momentum, you've actually lost trust, right? People don't believe that they've been heard. And so that turnaround time has to be quick, and I think a little bit more authentic, that, hey, we don't know what we're going to do yet, but this is what we heard, right? We value this. We know that took courage. We want to work with you to come up with some meaningful change here in the organization at all three levels, right? There's change for us individually, there's change for us teams, but then there are some big changes here that we want to make together. So yes, absolutely a danger, right? The most important part is what you do next.
So true, Dan. There's a lot of questions here, and we will do our best to get to all of them in a follow-up. I want to ask just one more, Dan, so we only have a couple of minutes left. I want to be mindful of folks' time here. What about the frontline leader? That maybe this isn't something that is, what is there hope for someone that's responsible for a team, but maybe isn't the decision maker organization-wide?
Absolutely. Yeah. So this is where the analogy of the river breaks down. You're not just a rock or a tree in the river. You're actually part of the water, right? You're more like a raindrop in the river. Every person contributes and influences the culture. And so nobody is powerless, right? We all come together to co-create culture, which means everybody has influence to change it. And as we do that in a small way, right? I would say never underestimate the power of small moves done consistently over time, right? That small change can absolutely turn into a movement that redirects everything, right? And so don't undervalue just how much influence and power you do have, regardless of where you are. There's elements that you control.
Awesome. Dan, there are so many more questions in here, but we're up against the end of our time here. Dan, thank you so much for sharing your time. I think one of my takeaways of what you just said there is that culture transformation model applies at a team level, it applies at a department level, and it applies at organizations across the way. Dan, thank you for your time. Folks, thank you for joining us today. I just wanted to remind you that the link from the recording will be sent to you, so you can share that with folks as you see fit, people that could use help from it. We actually will be, with that link, we'll be sending out a link to our culture transformation starter kit. So things that you can get started with on your own to make that change wherever you reside in the organization. And within that, we encourage you to reach out to us and we can help you out. Okay. And that's not, I don't mean that as a sales pitch. We can just help you get started, even if, you don't have unlimited resources. We understand that. There was a lot of questions. Our friend Marianne actually put a great question in the chat, Dan. I apologize we couldn't get to it. We will actually, as part of our follow-up, summarize some of the questions and get them back out to the folks that have participated. So folks, thank you for taking time to be here. Check out our website at theachievecenter.com. Sign up for our newsletter, follow us on LinkedIn. And just stay connected in whatever means are possible. We really enjoy hearing from you all and building that community. So thanks for joining. Dan, thanks again, my friend. Spectacular as always.
I was like, thanks, Chris. It's been a pleasure.